All right, kids, it's time to talk about the desert. We just spent a couple of days talking about some of the wettest biomes when we were in the tropical rainforest and the temperate rainforest, where we got 200 to 400 inches of rain in between those two per year. Now we are in the desert, and we know that again there are different deserts. So I don't, there are some deserts that are very cold. We can get into that later. But we're just gonna generalize deserts as the places that are extremely hot and they are extremely dry. And it's important to know that because there are some different places that we can label as deserts. We're more or less going to focus on these dry, sandy deserts is the thing that we're going to look at. It's important for us to understand that the abiotic factors in a desert are very, very important to note. So before we start digging into the biotic factors and adaptations needed, we need to take a look at the desert abiotic factors. And so we'll do that really quickly. And here are some notes that you could take on that. If I can find the right tab, there we go. Abiotic factors. So we're talking about sun, soil, water, and climate. The sun is extremely intense. I should probably even come back up here and put in most deserts. Okay, we have some that are a little bit different than that. In most deserts, the sunlight's very intense, and that's one of the reasons why the climate can be, in many of the deserts, very, very hot. Although there are others that can be cold, and we've talked about that. I don't want you to just generalize it all, but for us, when we're talking about deserts, they're typically referring to the super hot deserts. When we look at the soil, I think this is one that's pretty easy. We look around, we're thinking, okay, it's the desert, it's all sandy, and it is, and that sandy soil is not great. That is not good for growing. It does not hold water the correct way. And obviously, and sometimes it's so hot that when it does rain and the sand is so hot that the water pretty much evaporates as soon as it hits the ground. Things aren't even able to collect the water in the way that they would need to. And as in talking about the water, there's not much. It's extremely dry in this area, and it's important that animals and plants are able to overcome that extreme heat and dryness. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive. The seasons in the hot and dry deserts are typically pretty much hot in the summer and warm the rest of the year. And they don't get a lot of rain. And like I said, when it does rain, it's like a pretty quick storm, and unfortunately, it evaporates faster than it can sink into the soil and be collected by the plants and animals. And that's not a good thing. There is one in particular desert, the Atacama Desert, that gets 1 millimeter of rain. That's not a lot of rain, boys and girls. 1 millimeter. Go look at that on a ruler. 1 millimeter of rain about every 5 to 20 years. And again, like I said, at the bottom of the screen, you see for the most part, we're focusing on the hot, dry deserts. I do just want you to be aware that there are other types of deserts out there that you might read about later on. But for us, we're looking at the sandy, hot, dry deserts. And so we have covered pretty thoroughly the abiotic factors, and we can talk about those a little bit more if we need to. The plants of the desert plants have many adaptations that help them survive such a hot, dry environment. And when you start thinking of something like a cactus, one of the things that a cactus can do is it stores water. It stores water, kind of like we talk about how camels can store water for a little bit longer periods of time. They also live in the desert sometimes. So cactus. Now, the other thing about cactus, and we've learned about this with the coniferous forest when we were talking about those pine trees, all plants go through a process of sweating where the water is released from them called transpiration. Plants that need to keep water in them, like the pine trees, those coniferous trees, and the cactus typically have some kind of a waxy coating on the outside of them that help stop them from losing as much water. And honestly, we joked about this in one of my classes yesterday. When you put on deodorant, it really is like this almost waxy kind of layer that goes in your underarm that helps stop you from sweating so much, which is what it's meant to do. And so these plants have something kind of similar. They have a wax on the outside of them. Now, when we think of a cactus, we think of something that's super spiky and pokey. It's like that for a reason. It's like that because it tries to keep as many animals off of it, because if I were in a desert and I saw a big giant cactus and I knew that it stored water, that would be one of the first places that I would go for my food sources if I was an animal. But those thorns are going to keep me away a little bit longer. Of course, unless, like the giraffe and the acacia tree, I'm an animal that adapts to the fact that that happens, and I'm able to work my way around that. The cactus have very shallow roots. Their roots don't go very deep, and the reason for that is they need to be really close to the surface, because remember, when it does happen to rain, the water doesn't even have really a lot of time to sink in. They want to keep that rain, the water at the top of the soil. They try to soak it in as quickly as possible, and that's extremely important for the cactus so that it can store that water. Now, they're not just plants in a desert. They're animals as well, and obviously they have to have very special adaptations also. The deserts are extremely important because we do have animals that live there. And they have adapted to live in these hot, dry environments. You'll find snakes, insects, lizards that live in the desert. You're going to find some birds. You might find like kangaroo rats. We'll take a look at that later, I think, and kit fox. And it's hard to think that they would be able to survive, but they have been able to adapt in order to live there. And that's very important. Some of these animals spend their entire life and they never drink a drop of water. They get their juices, and this is really gross, from the bugs that they eat. So they spend a majority of their life foraging around eating bugs, and because the bugs that they eat are rather juicy, that's the only liquids that they take in their diet. They don't go looking for sources of water. They get all their juice from bugs. So the next time you're complaining about drinking a glass of water, just be thankful that you don't have to get all your juice from eating a lot of bugs. That's pretty disgusting. Sometimes cactus and things fall. Obviously, a lot of things die, and obviously the decomposers are doing their job then as well. But during that time, mice will build their homes in that. And they are smart because they're like, hey, this thing is super pokey, and I'm pretty tiny. I can get through these little spines. But if I build my home in here, other predators that are trying to come after me that are bigger will have a little harder time, because like a coyote and a hawk is going to have a little harder time getting into a cactus without getting poked. So the mice are actually kind of smart for living there as well. Now, we've talked about this before. I'm not allowed to really show videos on here and then have those videos play on YouTube. I don't want my channel banned, so I highly recommend watching the video that's after this, because it talks about this fennec fox. Some people actually have them at home as pets. You can make your own conclusions on whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it is a desert animal that people have taken home as a pet. Very cool video. And I'm going to stop there on deserts. So let's just take a look at some of the biotic factors that you might find in a desert. There are fennec fox, snakes, mice, hawks, birds, cactus, bushes, trees, all living things that you might see there. And no matter what you are, plant or animal, if you're a living thing, you need to overcome the high heat and the low amounts of water. So you have to adapt to that. And we talked about the cactus. One way the cactus adapts to that is it has a waxy coating that helps keep the water inside of it. So it's able to store more water inside of it a lot longer. It has very shallow roots. So on the rare occasion that it does rain, they're able to soak up as much of that water as possible. It's got spikes all over it to protect it from any herbivores that might find it as a good snack, and that's very important. Animals that live there have to overcome the heat as well, and many of them are nocturnal. What that means is they spend most of their time during the day asleep, and they come out at night. And when they come out at night is when they are foraging for food, looking for water sources and things like that. And we talked about some of these animals, like the only thing that they ever eat are bugs, and that's how they get the juices that they need. That would be like the liquids that your body needs in order to survive. So all of these animals in the desert have a very specific niche that they fill, but they've also had to overcome some pretty extreme things like lack of water and high amounts of heat in order to survive in the desert.